Hi, everyone. My name is Elijah Meeks. I'm one of the co-founders of the Data Visualization Society and the Chief Innovation Officer at a startup called Notable. And I'm here with Dr. Meg Pirrung, and we are talking about careers in data visualization. This is the first in a multi-part series. We'll be doing this over the next few months, where we'll talk to a variety of folks who do data visualization in their job and talk about how they got to where they're at, what path they've taken, and what lessons they can offer for other folks who are on the way to their to integrating or focusing on data visualization in a professional career. Meg, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for coming. Like Elijah said, I'm Dr. Meg. I have a BS in computer science and a PhD in computational bioscience, but currently I refer to myself as a design scientist. My formal job title is product designer. I work at a startup called Hyperscience doing interactive machine learning and human-in-the-loop machine learning, which is like one of my favorite subject areas ever.
What is human-in-the-loop machine learning, Meg? For those couple of people who don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could give a whole talk on it because I even take it further than just human-in-the-loop machine learning. A really easy way to understand it, that probably everyone, or not even probably, but everyone has experiences like CAPTCHAs. So when you as a human are labeling fire hydrants or street lights or something like that, that is technically human-in-the-loop machine learning because they are using your input to label those images and then using those labels to train a machine learning algorithm. So there's a human doing some step of that loop. But what I prefer to do and what I like to focus on is what I call human-centered human-in-the-loop machine learning, where the human is doing things that humans are good at, like sense making and things like that. And then the computer is doing things that computers are good at, computation, all of that sort of thing. So that's just, quick primer on human-in-the-loop machine learning, which is cool.
I mean, the concept itself is very similar to some of the things that we do with data visualization, right? Because in data visualization, there is a human in the loop. And while you're not building a model necessarily, though there's some automatic data visualization products that are becoming more and more prominent out there, the cognitive load that people refer to, and I think cognitive load is actually like a messy term that got a lot of friction because of a talk at Outlier. But we try to encode variables onto graphical objects, and what we end up doing is we end up saying, well, this is very efficient for a human being to measure length or something like that, and we build this interface that somebody then processes. And there's a lot of this sort of meat space outside of the data visualization processing that goes on, where, to your point, the meaning making happens, the semantics maybe happen. And I'm wondering, just to get really right into it, and we'll come back and we'll talk about your sort of career path a bit more. But how has that affected the way that you've analyzed effective data visualization? Like thinking about that more formal approach that you've got and the sort of informal, similar approach that goes on with data visualization?
So I guess I would say, again, since I call myself a design scientist, I do actually attempt to just formalize those things. I try to come up with like proxy metrics that are things that are measurable. There's actually a publication out there that I worked on with one of my colleagues at the time. He's now graduated. He was in grad school at the time, Dr. Eric Corbett, and we came up with interactive machine learning heuristics. So again, sort of taking these things that are less formal and maybe more on the qualitative side of measuring things and trying to quantify them and codify them and make them more easily testable through hypotheses and measurement. So essentially, that's what I try to force it to be formalized.
Right.
That's kind of what I do.
I wonder. So there's things that can be done if you have a PhD in bioinformatics. Is that right?
computational bioscience.
Computational bioscience.
Yeah, the semantics of those two terms, like the people in the two camps would like fight each other over.
Right. Right. I mean, I have strong opinions on what infographics means versus data visualization, and the regulars, the normies, wouldn't even understand why I'm complaining. But so there's things you can do with a PhD in computational bioscience, right? And then there's things that you might have as perhaps lessons for folks who don't have the formal training and who are just going about it in day-to-day life. So for instance, one of the things I like to talk about when people come to me and say, I've built this amazing data visualization library, it can show 1 million points on screen at once. And I say to them, well, how are you showing those 1 million points? Because if it's a scatter plot and it's on a 1,000 by 1,000 pixel canvas, then unless there's any overlap at all, you've got just a black square, right? And if there is overlap, then what you're asking people to do is either to squint and like you're offloading on the human being, the pattern recognition and the meaning making there. And that's been effective sort of from a practical rhetorical perspective. Because everybody sort of realizes that 1 million data points is a black square on a canvas like that. What are some practical ways that you think that folks could bring that formal thinking in when it comes to the kind of design work they do with data visualization?
I guess I would say, and just kind of describe the way that I approach it. And it's just like trying to use the scientific method that most of us learned like in high school, where you have a hypothesis and that hypothesis can be a design. And you want to test that hypothesis in some way, and you come up with all of these things before you just throw it out in the world and people are used to it or have learned something about it. But before actually going and putting the pixels down and then having it developed into a real product, but thinking about it from that scientific method point of view, where you have hypotheses that you are testing using some measurable variables, whether they are directly quantifiably measurable or if they're proxy metrics for things like sense making or insight generation, which is really, really difficult to measure. But at least writing down and understanding what you're trying to do with that hypothesis. And then again, I didn't really mention, I mentioned a little bit with the human-centered in the loop, but like everything I do is always human-centered. I'm trying to help some human complete a task that otherwise they would be unable to complete for whatever reason, whether there's, too many data points or, like visually, that's just impossible for humans to do that task. Like what I'm doing is coming up with a solution that enables a human to do something they couldn't do before, and using the tools around it to enable that. And the way that I enable that, my solution is a hypothesis that I want to test and iterate on and just sort of, do that scientific process with it.
And typically in sort of design practice, I love the term design scientist, right? I think that it's such an interesting overlap on a Venn diagram. So typically when you're approaching that hypothesis generation and validation, are you collaborative with the stakeholders in that? Like, do you let them in on it? Or is it more like something in the background where you're thinking, this is my hypothesis, I'm going to let them speak in human language and deal with it. I'm only using this to evaluate myself later on.
So I think in the beginning, I guess we can hop a little bit back to my career path in that, I mentioned.
Why don't we pull up your career path? Because you did us a favor and you actually created a visualization of your career path, which we're going to do for all of the interviews. And we're going to have a collection of these, because I think what's interesting is there's so many different approaches, right? Because the prompt was just show us your career path, and it could be a timeline or it could be a sketch, who knows? But yeah, so in the beginning, where is the beginning on this chart?
The beginning is actually probably the ... at the very beginning.
Right.
Where
it goes way back.
Yeah. So I guess actually like somewhere around middle school, I was first given a graphing calculator at this NASA SEMA Science, Engineering, Mathematics, and Aerospace Academy. It was a free STEM program for inner city students that didn't necessarily have exposure to those types of programs. And it was on Saturday mornings, and my mom found this program and she forced me to go, and I hated it because I wanted to watch Saturday morning cartoons instead. But I went, and I don't know, there was some sort of activity around like plotting the trajectories of like bottle rockets. And we got a graphing calculator, and the moderator, the person who was teaching the class, had already put a program on this graphing calculator, and somehow I got into the code version of it, or the source code of it, rather than where you just like stick in your numbers and it gives you a trajectory. And it just sort of made sense to me. Like reading the code, it just I don't know how, but it made sense to me. And so I taught myself how to program, and I wrote like a fortune teller cootie catcher program where you like choose numbers and colors, and it would give you a fortune. So that's kind of the ... where I got introduced to like programming and computer science, and all of just that sort of realm of things. And I just loved it, mostly because it made sense to me, and it made logical sense to me. And also I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed
Do you think the graphical component had something to do with that? Like, do you think that there was, because for me, I didn't really get deep into programming until it was about graphics. And then once it was, whether it was with GIS or with data visualization, and there were mathematical concepts, not having a PhD in some kind of hard science or even any PhD at all, some of these mathematical concepts were very challenging to me. I didn't have the experience with it. I didn't have the investment in it when I was in school. And then suddenly I cared about arctangents, right? I cared about like spherical geometry and stuff like that because I needed to make an arrow point out from a circle. So I wonder, do you think that helped to bring you, not just bring you in, to draw you in, but also to give you instant graphical feedback to the work you do?
100%. Yeah. That's, and kind of later on in my career, because I did start out with this BS in computer science, like, really just hardcore, computer science. Like I took, oh no, I just like brain farted. But like the really, really basic computing languages that you
like
use,
assembly and stuff like that.
Yeah, assembly. Like I took that and like learned all of that, and during that, sort of in my BS, I realized, like you mentioned, Elijah, that what I really loved was the graphical element of it. Was that I wrote some code, but then something came out. And that the thing that came out was really what interested me and how people used, whatever I produced from that code.
It physicalizes it, and like, I mean, it's totally a misnomer, right? But it physicalizes the math in a way that, like, just the happiness. I mean, I see these people and I work with these people, and I thank God that they exist, where they run something and they look at like, look, it's 10 milliseconds faster. Yes. And that to them makes them happy and like is meaningful feedback. For me, it's just, it has to be that the circle changes color.
Same. Yeah. It has to be the visual output, that visual artifact is definitely where I found that was what brought me joy from my, sort of initial more technical computer science.
It's funny because when you see the people who try to do visual coding languages, especially tools for kids, what they end up doing is a lot of flowcharts. Like a kid, like a sixth grader is saying, "Hey, what I need to do more of is flowcharts, right?" And somehow that's the concept that they think, oh, well, you don't understand the logical chain of operations, and so we're going to put this in some kind of flowchart, and then you're going to get it, and it's going to be easier. Whereas really, the idea, I think, that you're describing, or the experience you're describing, which is that you saw the variables and then you saw the output and you saw that you could tweak one thing to another. It's not like you took this bottle rocket trajectory and you changed it to be a baseball trajectory. You got the concept such that you could build something fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really exciting and empowering. And I think it's missing from this, from the conceptualization of how we teach and theorize about code.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny because I actually, when I was in high school, I was like the captain of the high school robotics team, and we did like first Lego robotics, and you can program the Lego like Mindstorms and things like that using sort of like this, cut and paste, like drag and drop coding interface that since I started in like straight code, like those never made any sense to me. Like I was always like, no, get that away, show me the source code. Like I'm gonna do it here, because that was how my brain translated it. Couldn't translate this visual sort of plug-in blocks thing. Didn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how we talk about data visualization, the power of it. And in fact, I think that, it goes back to the human in the loop concept, right? That sometimes these visual metaphors, instead of reducing friction, add friction. Because we think that we're helping, when really what you want to do is get out of the way and let the human, like show me the data is a problematic expression. But you do want to just let them in. Like one of our upcoming guests is focused on tables as data visualization. And I love that concept, because tables are data visualization. Tables aren't show me the data, but they are a form of data visualization that allows people to really sort of dig in an unstructured way that might be the best thing for them, rather than some kind of more sophisticated or more distilled data visualization.
Yeah, and I mean, I would also like segue a little bit into like different people have completely different learning styles as well. And so, like, my learning style of just like looking at the code and decomposing it and logically figuring it out is not the same as someone's learning style. Like some people are really good with those sort of like visual code editors, and that makes more sense to them.
Yeah.
I think that's also really important. Both for like data visualization as well as like human loop machine learning, or just like learning anything in general. Understanding that different people have different learning styles, and then and that's like a really core thing for me, because I know that I have like a very particular learning style that I used to get chastised a lot in school. For like teachers who thought that I wasn't paying attention. And I was like, well, actually, when I'm sketching my notes, I'm paying way more attention, like listening to you, than if I stared straight at the board, in which case I will just like notice all of the weird like difference and like, posters on the wall and things like that. So like learning styles is another thing that I think is really important when designing visualizations. For big audiences, and also for designing interfaces for people, like understanding that there's these different learning styles, and then making whatever product you have accessible to everyone, no matter what their learning style is. Oh no.
Hi, Meg. It looks like we've lost Elijah for a moment there.
Oh no.
Again. So I know that we haven't had a chance to keep digging in maybe in your timeline for what you've been looking at in terms of your career journey, and we've focused on some of these different themes. Are there any other kind of call out moments as you go ahead and think through what your moments in your career and these different kind of phases that you've had that you want to call attention to as we think about the goal of sharing with people what it looks like to kind of have one of these very interesting journeys in data visualization careers?
Yeah, so it's funny because essentially the whole time during my career, I've been just looking for what brings me joy. It's kind of like funny, like the Marie Kondo thing, like what sparks joy for you? I've worked in a lot of different industries. Obviously, I have a PhD, so I spent a significant amount of time in academia. After that, I worked at Pacific Northwest National Lab, which is a DOE-funded national lab with a science focus. That's where I first got introduced to deep learning, machine learning, design for human-in-the-loop machine learning. Got to attend like the NeurIPS conference, which is like, all of the big names in machine learning go there. And we got to do a demo for a piece of software that I worked on called SharkSoar, which you can find on my portfolio. Where it's just like there are so many different really complicated problems to solve, And I got introduced to those really early, starting out in academia and then going to this sort of government work. Like there are these really diverse, really gnarly problems to solve. And in like through my career, I have worked on, generating solutions, which are my hypotheses. So like, how do you solve these really gnarly problems? And because I've had this experience in all of these different ways, like I bring all of that knowledge and like problem solving in different ways to the work that I do today and the work that I did in the past. Like I love having a really diverse set of experiences to draw on when I'm like coming up with something that's going to help someone solve some problem. But I would also like note that there have been many times where like that didn't go over well with like the job that I was at or like the place that I was interviewing at, especially because currently my real like job title is designer, and that title carries a lot of baggage and expectations, and it's a shape that I would say that I don't fit in perfectly, but I think that I'm a more effective, more useful sort of like Swiss Army knife, for having all of these different experiences and knowing all of these different areas. But sometimes that doesn't come across easily in interviews and things like that, where they're like, we just want to see the pixels. And I'm like, but the story is way more interesting.
Sorry about dropping out like that. Of all of the things that I expected to happen during the first of these interviews, I did not expect my power to go out.
Oh no!
For a second, I have no idea why. I guess it's just that's just how exciting this conversation is. You were talking about expectations. We can get back to the differences in learning that we were talking about in a second. But you were talking about expectations that people have for you as a designer, and how that gets in the way of what you think is the most effective work. And besides that focus on maybe mock-ups or any kind of graphical product, which is funny because it tracks with what we were saying about the calculator, right? Which is like they just want to see the bottle rocket trajectory. They don't want to see the source code. What do you think? Where do you think would be the best way for sort of folks higher up in the food chain in leadership to adjust their expectations around what a designer is and does that more reflects what you think you've been successful at?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I feel like it's important from the top, but it's also a little bit, and it's not my favorite part of the job of being a designer, like evangelizing, like actually like when I was fresh out of school, and I applied to Google because that's what everyone does. And they offered me like a position that was like a design evangelist. And I was just like, that sounds awful. Like, I already know that design is awesome. Like, why do I have to go convince people that design is awesome? But through my career since then, I realized that it's a little bit our responsibility as designers to communicate, like the same way that, when you're a scientist, it's a bit your responsibility to communicate your science, which was kind of like the core of how I ended up in data visualization during my graduate career. I saw a lot of data visualizations in scientific publications that were so incredibly complicated. And then when I tried to explain to my mom, like what I do every day, and it's like, well, it's a phylogenetic tree. And it's like, what does that mean? And so I felt, as a graduate student in computational bioscience and writing publications, I was like, I know that some of my funding comes from, taxes. And I feel like it's our responsibility to make this information understandable to like everyone who's a stakeholder in it. And so that was actually my entire dissertation, whose title I don't exactly remember. It's like useful and informative data visualizations of microbial ecology data, something like that. And it was like different types of visualizations of the same underlying data. So, again, ties into sort of like these different learning styles thing. But also when you're communicating to different groups of people, different types of visualizations are more effective. So yeah, I don't know, I kind of ran.
Well, I think that, I thought it was interesting when I worked on some IUCN breadless data when I was at Stanford, and I didn't have sort of a background in ecology and all of that stuff. I had a bit of environmental science in grad school, but it was interesting to me when we saw these sort of clean species taxonomy trees, right? And then I get told, well, actually, technically, the line should go back up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I was asked to do that at one point, I said, well, I can't do that. And this was early in my career. I'm like, the layout doesn't do that, so it just doesn't happen. And it's interesting how some of our most important concepts, some of our most important issues are hidden by the technical, and the technical and design is all wrapped together because there's no need to create something a little bit more complex than that because there's nothing more complex than that to show. And as a result, there's nothing more complex than that to show.
Mm-hmm.
So I can, one of the things I have always banged the drum on is the hockey stick graph that everybody talks about being one of the most, the climate change and CO2 production and everything. And the hockey stick graph that says, this is it, we're dying and we need to change things. And how important this is, how important like this graph is to blah, blah, blah. And I have said, and I've said it in a rather sort of angry way. And so maybe it's not like, maybe I'm not deeply,
not angry, it's just aggressive.
But if they'd made a better graph, maybe we wouldn't all be burning to death and flooding 40 years later.
It's very true. Like, it's very true.
It is, that the responsibility for good data visualization isn't just in that sort of 15-minute busy executive precise decision or communication between two experts, which clearly is what the hockey stick graph was for.
Right.
It wasn't meant for public consumption. But I still think that even those busy executives and even those scientific communicators get confused by this stuff or don't, are constrained by poor design and data visualization.
Yeah. I think it's like, this is kind of an issue that I've experienced both in like being in the design industry as well as the data viz industry, where because it is sort of like a visual artifact, there's kind of this perception that it should be pretty and that there's sort of like this subjective artistic element to it. And yes, those things are important, but that's the presentation layer, like that's the cherry on top. Like you have to do that core problem solving work and making sure that what you're generating, solves the hypothesis that you're trying to solve for, before you worry about like, oh, does it look pretty? Like there were loads of even like really complicated scientific diagrams that I saw in publications where they're like, oh, we think that this data viz looks flashy, and so maybe it'll make it onto the cover of Nature. And it's like, yeah, but does it really communicate science to people?
Early on, I did a lot of work with network visualization, and network visualizations are great for two things: one, understanding complex systems, and two, being great backgrounds for slides for executives.
Yeah, exactly.
Of fancy companies. Let's go back to your career timeline, because I know that you were talking through it a bit. But here's what's interesting to me is that you started to talk about your the calculator origin story, which is spectacular. And then you do sort of a classic Bachelor of Sciences. It's the mid-2000s, so there's really not going to be, unless you're at a couple of different universities, it's not going to be a data visualization course, right? And so, and even the technology at the time is horrible. So if there was, you'd be doing something with Flare and Java, and it would just be more proof of concept. Java. Then you start to pursue the higher degree in computational bioscience, and data visualization is there. And you said that like by the end of it, that was really your focus was data visualization. You're talking more about design. How did you have to craft that yourself? were you guided to that? What was it? What did that journey look like? And also, it's happening in 2010 to 2015, which I'm sort of, that's when I was growing up in data visualization, really. And I wonder, did the conversations out in the world affect that? Did the technologies out in the world affect that? Or was it more an internal, like, talk to me about that 5-year experience.
Yeah. So I'll pop back just a little bit to say that, I'm a first gen higher education degree holder in my family. So I didn't have anyone, around who had gone through that experience, to understand like what you need to do to be successful. It was just kind of like, again, like my mom being my cheerleader the whole time, her saying, I know you can do it, even though she wasn't really sure. She just said, like, I know you can do it. And then I was like, okay,
it's what you're supposed to say. Come on.
Yeah. So like in my BS, I interned in a bioinformatics lab that did like RNA alignments. I was actually a CS and math double major. I'm like 2 classes away from the math degree, but the class is like abstract algebra, which is like the worst thing ever. If you know what abstract algebra is, like algebra is enough. Like, why do you have to go and make it abstract? But anyways, yeah, I interned in this bioinformatics lab. Because as a CS student, I was like, similar to like we said before, I wanted to see what I did do something that was meaningful to me. And I found this bioinformatics, this like RNA sort of bio application of computer science to be something that was really interesting to me. So then I ended up, after that, I was like, no, I don't want to be a code monkey. And I love those people. I love the people that find like optimizing code to be their joy, but that's not me. And I also just really like, I love learning. I like researching things. I like exploring things. And so an advisor I had at the time was like, it sounds like you should go to grad school. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I will go to grad school then. And so I applied to the University of Colorado, mostly because I really love snowboarding. I grew up in Ohio snowboarding on old trash heaps. But anyways, yeah, so I actually started out in a biochem program, which was not the place for me. I was a computer scientist, not a biochemist by any means. OChem did make me cry. But I did enough to sort of like understand my footing there. And then realized that there was this computational bioscience program at the University of Colorado, Denver. I started out in Boulder. And I was working with the microbial ecology lab that had a lot of products that had data visualization as part of their, sort of artifact generation. And so when I started out as like a rotation student, like sometimes I was just like writing code because I had this CS background. I was just like writing code and like optimizing things, like parallelizing scripts and things like that. And I, in working on a lot of different little projects, I realized that the projects that I liked the best had some sort of user interface and some sort of data visualization component. And so then when I was like writing my thesis proposal, I was like, well, I want to do stuff that I like and that I find interesting. And so I wrote a thesis proposal that was about data visualization. And so, yeah, I guess I would say it was an artifact of the fact that that was what was successful for that lab in getting published. And then also my own internal understanding of like which projects I found to be the most rewarding. And
it lived in the same realm of sort of user-facing stuff as the interface.
Yes.
And I think it's really interesting all this time thinking about design and all the discussion that design has around the formal aspects of design. The more I think about it, the more it is like of research. Like I never wanted to leave school a research kind of career for a lot of folks. Like there's a huge amount of research. There's a huge formal research that I've learned and I've internalized, but I haven't really thought about it as scientific research. And that's something very interesting to me. It lends more credence to the data, to the design scientist, right? it's actually something that isn't as odd. It isn't as strange an overlap in the Venn diagram as I originally kind of thought. I've got a question for you from Lisa Overton, though. Can we pull up the timeline again? She wants to know.
Yes, that's a good call.
Why is there no legend?
No legend. I know.
And you're going to say there is a legend in there.
Yes.
It's
I
you.
was kicking myself. I was like, how did I not put a legend on here? Like, first rule of data viz, come on. Got to have a legend for your colors. So the orange is academia. Purple is like professional career pre-COVID. The teal is professional career post-COVID. And then the bright green is where I am currently in my career.
Excellent. And I like there's a little COVID icon to indicate
the
start of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, what's PNNL?
Pacific Northwest National Lab, DOE funded national lab with a focus on like user facilities, like with giant NMR machines, like doing science that you can only do with really complicated, really high-powered machines that then spit out really complicated, huge amounts of data that then you need to do something with. And so when I was at PNNL, I worked in the visual analytics, whatever word they use for team or directorate or thing, but also within the National Security Directorate. So worked on using visualizations and visual analytics to solve these sort of national security and scientific problems. Right.
And then, you know, Overstock, I know what Overstock is. And Collective Medical, so probably a medical design firm, a medical like products firm.
So actually Collective Medical was a startup based in Utah. Overstock also based in Utah. That's how I ended up there, or at both of those companies. Collective Medical was essentially sort of making your medical records and sort of your medical information more easily transferable across different hospital systems. So like if anyone's familiar with that, like Epic, it was supposed to do that, but like it doesn't. And so there.
I mean, isn't HIPAA just a portability act? Shouldn't HIPAA have handled that?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's kind of this thing, but you know that industry is very like risk averse, and so things move really, really slowly, even when it seems quite obvious that like you know things should be digitized, things should be easily transferable. That kind of a main goal there that was also important to me. Like that startup got created by essentially a nurse who had patients with substance use disorders, and they would often end up in the ER. But sometimes they had different names, or you know their information was a little bit off, but it was the same person. And how do you cross-reference that so that person can get help earlier on rather than after they're having an issue?
That's very interesting. And we do have another question. I'm not sure how much programming you do these days, but they want to know your favorite programming language for data visualization. And let's broaden that to say, you know, how do you do data visualization, programming or not?
So I don't code at all anymore. Sometimes when I'm interviewing, people will ask me how much percent of my, like, I won't even tell people that I know how to code when I interview anymore, because they'll always ask you to start doing it.
It's blood in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
I accidentally mentioned SQL during a Netflix interview, and then we talked about SQL for 30 minutes, and I'm like, I'm not here to write SQL. I didn't feel comfortable with my SQL. But so what is it that what is it for the most part? Well, back when you did.
But back then, I would say
TI-83.
No, D3, like in JavaScript, making interactive data viz in D3 was my favorite thing. That was another thing that I understood, like a lot of other people, the way that D3 was set up to do things like didn't quite make sense. And a lot of people found it to be like a really difficult tool to learn. But for me, it was another one of those things where like I looked at it and I was like, oh, this makes sense to me that this is the way that you would do things like this. So yeah, that was what I primarily used when I was coding data visualizations.
And nowadays, you're mostly taking the more sort of traditional design approach, where you'll draw something up and say, "Hey, it has to look something like this."
Yeah. I live in Figma. I made this particular data viz in Illustrator, but that was just because like there's like certain things that I'm still used to from that space. The bars are actually like representative. They're the right size, like pixel equivalent to the time frame that I spent at the different places and things like that. So yeah, I did that by hand, but still forgot a legend.
So when you're moving through your career, you know, do you feel like you're headed in one direction? Do you feel like you're oscillating towards something, or is it or more that you've moving away from certain things? Like, how would you feel like the roles and responsibilities that you've had track from the beginning to the end?
I feel like I would say I think that my experience is getting more narrow, in that I have figured out, you know, kind of what brings me joy, and I have chased that. But then again, I have this like quite diverse experience at a lot of different places with different kinds of problems to solve. And so sometimes I get introduced to something brand new, you know, like before I was in grad school, I didn't know about data visualization. Like that wasn't a thing that was on my radar at all. Like I was like, I'm a computer scientist, I'm going to code things. And then data viz came around. I was like, oh, I'm a data visualization person, I'm going to do this. And then in writing my dissertation, I was like, oh, actually, this is a user experience question, I'm going to do that. And then I got to PNNL, and there's like deep learning and machine learning. I was like, oh, that's interesting, I want to design for that. But in leaving PNNL, I was entirely too early for like industry level human in the loop machine learning. So like no one knew what I was talking about when I would like give talks about that. So essentially, like from like leaving PNNL until now, I've been chasing that. Like I was like, I always said like I want to do human in the loop machine learning again. Like that's what I care about. Like I find that so interesting, and it's such a gnarly problem to solve. So I kind of just keep chasing the things that I'm interested in, and narrowing it down while like honing my skills so that I get to choose like what I work on and what I like to do.
We've got another question from Mohammed and from Yvonne about what's your favorite tool for data visualization? Have you used any tools like Tableau or like Data Wrapper, things like that?
I've used Tableau a little bit. Sometimes like Microsoft Power BI, I think is like business intelligence. I don't know all the acronyms. They all like look a little bit the same to me. But again, you know, kind of how you described, Elijah, it's more on the side of I go into Figma, or I actually like pull out my iPad and I sketch what I want the data visualization to look like and like what data it's supposed to encode. And then, you know, I drop that into an interface that's surrounding it that, you know, provides more tools for the person to use. So like I myself don't, you know, typically use data visualization tools. I'm rather generating actual like data visualizations that someone else develops.
You're the human in the loop, where the other humans are more like the robot, like workers.
A little bit, yeah.
I wanted to pull up a couple of these charts. So the Data Visualization Society had a State of the Industry report where we, I think 1,500 people or so answered this State of the Industry report. There we go. That's why they need to be on their sides. And so folks answered a whole host of questions, and God bless them for putting up with this very long survey, and super valuable. And then DVS had a competition to allow people to visualize it. And so there are a number of these that we can provide a link for folks that you can see these different, really innovative ways that folks visualize that data. And I just wanted to pull out a couple of them and sort of plot a couple of the answers that you had to those questions. And one of them is that you said, you know, in your answer, the block that you got was somewhere between 5 and 10 years of experience in data viz. And I put you in the designer track because I'm forced to, by the constraints of the visual metaphor. There is no design scientist track. There is no, which would be a very small histogram. But also, I mean, you are and have been, you know, in these other roles, right? You've drifted in and out. But I'm curious what you think of, like, your general sense of the community, both not just from this chart, from the chart, because there's like a demographic argument about this chart, right? That it seems like we've got like a wave that's kind of come in, and that we're going to have to understand what that means for folks who are doing data visualization, because they do seem like they track around a similar place where you are in your career, but also the community more generally. Like, what has been your experience with the data visualization community, either on Twitter, where it's very prominent, or on LinkedIn or other social media, or just in general, maybe at meetups and things like that?
Yeah, I've found that I would say, like, I guess that's not true. So I was going to say that, like, you know, a majority of my data viz experience was sort of like while I was in academia, but that's not true, because at PNNL, I was in the visual analytics department. I did a ton of data viz there. But it's, I would say that, to me, at least, the community feels more, I don't know, like, vibrant's not quite fair, but when you have more of a research focus, in my experience, the new things and the interesting and, like, pushing the envelope and coming up with something new and something interesting and a new way of doing things tends to live more on that side of like, positions that have a research focus. So, like, academia obviously is going to have a research focus, and then at a national lab, all national labs, that's kind of like the point of them is to have some aspect of it that is a research focus. And in all of my industry positions, research has just not really been a focus. It's just producing data visualizations, and in that there's not sort of resources for doing the research part of it. It's generally, you know, reproducing data visualizations that already exist, but with the data that you have. And so I think that's my observation.
So the challenge that you have, if I understand you right, is that you don't have the conversations on Twitter. And I've noticed this myself, right? When I was at Stanford and I was doing cool digital humanities stuff, I always had cool things to share. The professors I was working with were happy, didn't care if it was accurate or not. They're like, "That's cool. That looks cool." Yeah, and then I got to Netflix and they said, "Well, no, you've signed an NDA and none of this can go anywhere unless there's a lot of pixelation going on." And so, if I understand, do you mean that it's harder to take part in those conversations? It's harder to break through to sort of get to some level of impact in the community, some level of prominence, without being someone who's in a research or perhaps more public-facing, like data journalism position? I
think, that's one that I haven't been in, which I think is super cool, data visualization journalism. But I think it's a function of whatever the space that you're in, what metrics they use to measure success. And so in academia or in research, you know, like, publications are what we use to measure success, and you need to generate new things, novel ideas, in order to be able to publish them, for the most part. That's like a whole. But
just getting work done in industry isn't something that's very exciting.
Right. Yeah. That's not the measure of.
So how do you think, like, you know, the DVS is a big global organization with tens of thousands of members. Like, how could they correct that a bit? Like, the Information is Beautiful Awards is coming, right? DVS has the Information is Beautiful Awards. A Tableau dashboard has never won an Information is Beautiful award. I think. I mean, maybe it has. I don't know. But I imagine that there are a lot of impactful data visualization products,
Right.
or maybe even something like interfaces around the data visualization. The data visualization itself is rather mundane, but there's some kind of layer to it, whether it's in the collaborative layer or the user. I mean, something that I'm deeply interested in now is collaborative data visualization, but also like the commenting or the user interface. And that's not going to win a prize, right? What's going to win a prize is a really amazing sort of geometric like monstrosity, right? Which I don't blame and have taken part in myself. But how do we help for the folks that are more interested in practical results? How do we help get them like that platform, respect even? I think that you haven't said these things, of course, but this is something that I definitely have heard and felt.
Yeah, it's an interesting tag. I mean, it's definitely like a thing that I've experienced, like especially considering like conferences that the style of conferences that I attended when I was in academia or when I was at PNNL, which would be like IEEE Viz, ACM Pi, ACM IUI, things like that. But again, they're very academic and research focused. And then in industry, when I go to those conferences, it's generally someone talking about like a very specific product that they worked on, how they brought it to market, what their journey was like, things like that. And so it's kind of a different audience. And I think that there would just be great benefit to trying to mix those audiences a little bit more. And I know there are some conferences that are trying to do that, to bring more of that together.
And IEEE Viz has been trying to improve that, bring industry more and more into that. So that's definitely on people's minds. But I agree. We have another question from Bagel. It's what are some design-focused resources you found influential in your career?
Design-focused resources. Oh, that's hard. That's like a really big question. Design focused. I honestly find that changing your perspective, like in your entire life, like changing the way that you see normal everyday things, is the most effective way to become a good designer, to just, essentially evaluate. And I guess, so when I was in undergrad, I took a class that was on user interface design. And like one of the first activities that we had to do was take, like Don Norman's book and go to like Costco, and there was like this weird carpet cleaner contraption, and you had to label all of the different affordances, and just sort of like understand and like what is this affordance for, that sort of thing, and interpret normal everyday things in your life with a designer's eye. And
look at it as an intentional, as a design thing, as an intentional thing, that even if it's a carpet cleaner, even if it's a I don't know, a packet of syrup from IHOP,
or even like a light switch, like which side of the door do you put the light switch on, like which one makes more sense. And that's just kind of, it can also be like a bit irritating because there are so many examples of really, really bad design. But I find that that's the best resource is just the world, and looking at the world and thinking about how might I make this better for other people.
So I've got one last little chart that I wanted to show you and get your thoughts on. I think this one's a bit more interesting. So this is how do you spend your time, your data viz time, right? This is from so what's happened here is I filtered it down to design. It's a great little interface by Sandra Biller. And I filtered it down just to designers. So you can see that you're like in the minority on as far as the distribution goes for how much time you spend doing data viz, right? Producing visualizations. And I think that, we could talk about your career journey, and during that sort of 2000s, like the 2010s, when data viz really became a larger field, a larger profession, all these things, dominated, and to a certain degree still is dominated by people for whom data visualization is what they do. Basically full time. Nobody gets to do it full time because you got to put stuff around it to get the data visualization out into the world, but basically full time. And I think that what we're missing right now is voices. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is voices of people for whom data visualization isn't what they do with all of their time, but it's a key and important aspect to their professional success and their career, right? You've got a PhD in data visualization. You worked for 5 years at a national lab doing data visualization, right? And there's some muddiness to that because what that means for different people means different things. But fundamentally, those are like focused careers that people sit here, they come to Data Viz Society and they say, hey, I want to know how to get a career in data visualization. And that's what they have in mind, right? This full-time, I'm just making charts and I'm pushing boundaries and I'm making, doing cool graphical things with charts. And I'll win an Information is Beautiful award. You, on the other hand, at the end of all of that, right? 5 years PhD, 5 years at PNNL, or however many years, and at various other roles, you're now in a position where you're saying, I spend less than 5 hours a week doing data viz. So there's this really interesting perspective, because on one side, it could be that the answer is, data viz is garbage, and I had to get away from that as much as possible. The other side, which I think I've heard you say, and then plus you just shook your head, so I think you confirmed it, is that was extremely important for you to be successful in this design role that doesn't have very much data visualization in it. And so I wonder, what do you think about having that perspective, and how do you think we bring to more prominence that voice, that experience of someone who isn't, this amazing, well-known freelancer who's always getting the keynote opportunities at various conferences, but instead is someone who does data visualization less than 5 hours a week, but is doing important work, and the data visualization part of it was a very important aspect of their success.
Yeah, I think it's just similar to how I've been, describing my different various diverse experience. It's just like data viz is a tool that I use, and at the same time that saying, calling it a tool that I use makes it feel a little bit small, but I would actually also say that I consider a lot more things to be data viz than I would say that the general person probably thinks. And so it's like, I on the survey, I put that, or what I consider to be, like hard data viz, like I don't get to spend that much time on it. But a lot of things that I do, like even if it's, just like color coding different tags for some, text classification that I'm doing, like that's a data viz, and I'm doing that basically all the time. It's just, it's a tool in my toolbox that I use as a design scientist to solve problems for people. But I do miss it. I miss like the PNNL days of, like winning awards for like really, really, really cool, intricate data.
And doing that exploration, which there's something really sort of ludic about that exploration. I think that I've heard that before from people where I have, where they're doing more practical work, which is that they consider data visualization to be a lot more than what the sort of, it seems like the field considers it, right? Especially like the tables are data visualization.
Right, yeah.
This calendar app is data visualization, things like that in this way, or workflows are data visualization. There's a lot of things out there that aren't about numeric precision, which we typically think of as the majority of data visualization. That's something I've been banging on a lot, is that numeric precision isn't the only thing that you visualize. And so that's why bar charts aren't always the best choice. Network charts can be a good choice, or even pie charts could be a good choice.
They have their place.
So I wanted to end it here. Was there, before I bring up an Instagram of bunnies, I wanted to check and see if there was anything you wanted to sort of say to your audience. The Data Viz Society is going to be up on Twitter. Up on YouTube forever. So was there anything that you would like to offer just unstructured for folks who are interested in data visualization? They see you and they say, I want to be a design scientist too. I want to be more like Meg. What do I do?
Yeah, I guess, I would just, stay curious, I guess. It maybe sounds a bit generic, but like that's kind of the core of what I've been. Like and that's like very much my learning style, is like not risk averse. Like I'll press the button and see what happens afterward, even if it like opens a trapdoor that I fall into. Okay, well, I learned that time. But I'm very, have always just been like, I like to take things apart and see how they work, and then try and make it better for other people. Like that's what I care about. And I think that's an easy way to stay curious about the world and to learn lots of things, to get a lot of tools in your toolbox that you can use to solve really interesting problems. And, kind of got led here, but like, yeah, I feel like everything is data viz, like there's so many things that are data viz, and you can use it everywhere to make things better. And that's what I care about.
I love it. Well, thank you, Meg. I really appreciate it. Now, the one last thing was, we asked Meg early on if there was a link she wanted to share to some projects she was working on or something that she wanted, and she didn't have any except for this. Could you explain to our audience what's going on here?
So these are my two rescue rabbits, Nebula and Calypso. Right from their voice on their Instagram account, they are rabbit scientists from the planet Rabbitus, and they landed on Earth, and they are observing humans and recording their findings that they find, whatever the human does, interesting and curious. And it's funny to think about it from like a different perspective. Like, can you imagine if a giant rabbit came around taking pictures of your face all the time and then laughing with other giant rabbits about what your teeth look like? So yeah,
that would be weird. I have to admit, that would be
right.
very
strange.
It's not surprising to me after hearing the entire story. I think that, to me, it's another one of these career trajectories that is not this straight path, right? I think about the greased chute that often happens in Silicon Valley. You're the valedictorian in your high school, you go to Stanford, you get the internship at Google, you're at Facebook, and it just seems like you just knew what you wanted to do when you were, I never understood it. You knew what you wanted to do when you were 12 years old, and you're 30 now and you've just done it. To me, it seems like more of the data visualization success stories are about people who, when you say stay curious and be brave about that, are willing to occupy those spaces between these success paths, and that can be very scary. I mean, that's not, there's not good guides for that, and of course, we're not going to be able to build good ones, because it's not like the Meg path is a path. It's going to be, your path, and then we're going to talk about 9 other people's paths. And there will be some overlap. There will be some thematic similarity, but fundamentally what you're describing is like being a human being. Mm-hmm. And so it's not the easiest thing to just get a recipe or instructions for. So, I want to applaud you for, the way that you've approached it. I think you deserve the success that you have. And I think that the idea, the concepts that you've sort of relayed, they all connect, don't they? Mm-hmm. Right? And they all become something that you can call a design scientist, which I think there's room enough in that circle for a couple more now. And I think that actually,
definitely,
even
I would
more
love
so
it
than
more
I thought.
People felt like that. Yeah. I think it's awesome. I think it's the way to go.
Well, thank you for the time. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to everybody
for listening,
for the questions. Yeah, we'll be back with the next one. I'll make sure to post DVS and I will all talk about the next interviews, and there's also a link that we can share that talks about the next, I think, two more interviews with Lisa and Peter, and we'll get into more talks like these. Hopefully, folks found it useful, and Meg, stay in touch.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye now.